I'm having to re-record this, so I'm going to be as efficient as possible. So the reason why we're covering this fortress, I mentioned it in the previous video in the timeline that is leading up to the Wild West period. I referred to it as Ackerman fortress because during this period of time, contextually, it was known as Ackerman because that's what the Ottoman Empire called this fortress. Ackerman, meaning white stone. So it has a very rich history dating all the way back to the ancient Greeks' colonization of the Black Sea region. And I'm going to go through this and have a spotlight on Belgorod Dinostrevski because it is such a rich, it's a rich place in history, and it is a crucial area and point throughout our timeline and the timeline of the Cossacks that we'll be covering. So I will be making separate videos on the independent Cossack sieges of Ackerman, as it was known for their time period. However, I'm just going to be doing a quick spotlight of this place for you guys here today. There's a wonderful video, so you can actually get almost as close to hands-on as you can, besides getting a plane ticket and going there and checking this place out. So without further ado, let's get started. So first thing on your screen here, you're going to see a nice map of the Greek colonies in the Black Sea. If you look at the top left corner, you'll see a place called Thira, and this is the site upon which Belgorod Dinostrevski is currently placed in modern day. So, this was originally a Greek colony, like I said, called Thira, and it was developed roughly the 6th century, and it stayed there until roughly the 4th century. Now remember how time counts down to 0 once you're in BC time, right? So anyways, frequent attacks from invaders eventually destroyed this settlement, and those invaders being the Goths and the Huns, and then early Slavs and Bulgarians. But however, this area still remained settled and continued on in history. So the next kind of point in time where we get any sort of mentioning of the fortress is in the 13th century when the Genoese are there. For a lot of people, they don't necessarily know that Genoa had a massive presence and controlled a lot of the Black Sea, and in particular Crimea, from the 13th to 14th centuries. But anyways, it's not exactly known when the fortress was initially founded. However, it is mentioned by the Genoese that they started working on and building up a fortification based off of ancient ones. So, and then that's where kind of the story of Belgorod starts. So the next image that you're going to see on your screen is just to contextualize where this is in the world. So here's a map of Ukraine, and then as you can see, I've pointed out for you over here its location. And then now if we look at the provincial map a little bit closer of Belgorod Dinostrevski, because it's also an oblast, a province, you can see exactly where it's situated. So as you can see, it's situated on an estuary, and this estuary flows out of the Dniester River, as you can see here on the map, where it flows from the northwest down into the estuary, which then flows into the Chorne More, or the Black Sea. And that's why it's such a strategical location, and why it's been settled for such a very long period of time. It makes sense. Fresh water, the land and soil around this area is very rich as well, good for growing crops, that sort of thing. Taking over control of the fortress once the Genoese leave are the Principality of Moldavia. And so this is when the fortress becomes known as Chetiaia or Chetyatya Albay, literally meaning white citadel. The type of stone and clay that they used for the fortress gives it that appearance. So under the Moldavians, Chetyatya Albay becomes a really big metropolis, actually. About 20,000 inhabitants in their records, and kind of the different peoples that were making up the city at the time were Moldavians, Greeks, Genoese, Armenians, Jews, and Tartars. And the city started sprouting around the fortress, and was starting to grow more significantly. And the majority of the elements that you can see here of the fortress were constructed in the year 1440. At this time, the fortress already had about 25 to 30 towers, and the deep moat was already constructed there that you can see. However, there was a drawbridge instead of that stone bridge that's there, because that stone bridge is modern. It's built so that cars and people can have easy access into the fortress. That wasn't there originally. And you have to imagine as well, as you can see, some of the towers and the inner part of the keep, are bare. Now you have to imagine, as you can see, there's lots of these little cutouts for where rooms would have been, storage rooms, and areas for guards and military members to be shooting through. So you have to imagine all that was full and constructed with wooden timbers and interior design and flooring, and it would have been very elegant, and it would have been a lot more. It would have been filling that entire central area. There might have been a huge large wooden roof on the top of it, but that's lost throughout history, and obviously the decay of those organic materials. So just kind of filling in the blanks literally there for you guys. Try and imagine it as having that in this period of time. So anyways, this is then when the Ottoman Empire starts to get its eyes on this white citadel, as it was known. And so the Ottoman Empire tried to repeatedly capture the city with smaller forces when it started expanding up into this region. However, it was a very tough citadel to try and take. So the Turkish Sultan Bayazid II in 1484 knew that in order to take it, he needed to commit everything he had. So this is the biggest siege that the castle had undergone in its history at that time, and he marched forward with an army of about 300,000, and he was reinforced by 50,000 Tartars from the Crimean Khan Giray Mengili, or Mengli, sorry. And he had about 100 large ships besieging the castle on the coast and throughout the estuary. And that is the main reason why he was actually able to successfully take this place. However, the defenders were able to hold off this large force for about 9 days until they surrendered. And Stefan the Great of Moldavia did try to retake the city in 1485, however was unsuccessful. After this unsuccessful attempt, Ackerman, as it was then renamed, would remain under Turkish rule for the next 328 years. So that's the longest period of time that it was occupied by one single culture and empire. So that's why it ended up being called that. So the Ottoman Empire ended up making Ackerman one of its strongest holdings in the Bessarabia region, as it became known, because again, the strategic value of it and the location, and it was a region that they were trying to hold on to and dive into during their expansion. So as a result from this, the city ends up suffering an enormous amount of attacks and raids by Zaporozhny Cossacks throughout history, and especially during this Wild West period of time from the late 1500s all the way through to the late 1600s. And it was kind of like a rite of passage for all the big Ottomans to try and take it each and every time. Because you had Gregory Loboda, Severin Nalivaiko, Ivan Sulima, Ivan Sirko, which is a huge figures in Cossack history, all tried to take this fortress. However, all were unsuccessful. Moldavians, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as well, but at the end of the day, Ackerman just proved to be an impregnable stronghold and had a very good, well-maintained garrison, and the fortress itself was very well maintained, which is what I'm going to talk about next here, which is kind of during the this long 328-year period of Turkish domination. The fortress was repeatedly rebuilt and renovated with the newest technologies of fortification that were being developed in the world at the time. So in 1657, Melik Ahmed Pasha significantly strengthened the fortress, because for the past 100 years it had been suffering a lot of raids by the Cossacks, and you gotta update it, make it better. And then in 1707, the Ottomans invited French military engineers from Paris, and they helped construct the new bastion line, which you can see in the video here is the area with all these wide triangular slots and big broad towers facing both the sea and then the land to the west of the fortress, because in this way it was modernized so that they could have cannons on the walls and cannon batteries, and that would make this fortress even more impressive and impossible to take.